A very warm welcome to our second keynote, Didier Debaise, who is a Belgian scholar, researcher at the National Fund for Scientific Research, FNRS, and the director of the Center of Philosophy of Free University of Brussels, ULB, where he teaches contemporary philosophy. With Isabel Stengers, he is one of the co-founders of the constructivist study group known as GECO. His main areas of research are contemporary forms of speculative philosophy, theories of events, and links between American pragmatism and French contemporary philosophy. Didier is a prolific author, but I will restrict myself here to his English translations, beautiful books, Nature as Event, The Lure of the Possible, and Speculative Empiricism Revisiting Whitehead. We are very, very happy to have you, and I'm delighted that you've chosen to approach the topic of intelligence from a geophilosophical point of view. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here and to listen these incredible talks already that we had this morning and all during the afternoon. I will begin my talk by a quotation, not from Deleuze, but from Bruno Latour. And this quote is from The Inquiry into the Mode of Existence, an Anthropology of the Moderns. Here is the quote. The moderns are the people of ideas, their dialect is philosophy. We shall have to concentrate first of all on their curious regional ontology if we want to have the slightest chance of confronting the others, the former others, and Gaia, the truly other other. So if I choose this quotation is because I think it's an interesting diagnosis on our time, on our actual situation, on our present situation. And all my talk will be on the question of how the geophilosophy of Deleuze and Guattari offer a different diagnosis, but in the same but close to this one, and give us different kind of resources to think the actual situation. What I think very important in the quotation of Latour is first that he situates on the experience of the moderns, we the moderns. I know that it's a very controversial notion. A lot of people say, but who are these modern? Are they the European, the non-European, where they are, who they are, etc. I have, I think, a good answer to that, but I will not give it to you today. But I keep it for the discussion or maybe for the bar, if you want to join me to talk about that. But I'm pretty sure that I have a good answer to who are the moderns. What I'm more interested for today is the fact that Bruno Latour says what is our actual necessity, what we have to think about. It's and to localize and to situate the function and the situation of the present thought is in front of two main events. The first event is the event of what he calls Gaia. You have this Gaia, you know it, in Bruno Latour, but also in Isabel Stengers, who talk about the intrusion of Gaia, and in Viveros de Castro. The intrusion of Gaia is a way for Bruno Latour to identify the fact that we are entering not in a climate crisis, because crisis, the notion of crisis, gives all the time the impression that you can find a normal back situation. We are not in a crisis. We are in something else, and Gaia designates the fact that we are entering inside what we can call a new climate regime. And we have to take regime in two different senses. First, as we talk about political regime, so we have to think a new coordinate of the politics linked to the ecological situation, but regime means also regimes of knowledge, regime of experience. So we have to, in the same time, we are entering inside a new regime of thought. And we don't know, we don't have for the moment the orientation neither of this regime of thought nor of this political regime. That's the first part of the quotation that I found very interesting. The second part is when he says we have to think in front of the others, the past other and the present others. What he qualified the others is what, of course, not in the same sense, but what Descola called the other ontology, or Viveros de Castro also call it ontology, and that Bruno Latour preferred to use the other collectives. So in one phrase, we have the connection between a very specific epoch, the epoch of the modern, that we have to clarify after, during the discussion or at the bar, and the connection between the ecological regime, the transformation of the regime, and the decolonial endeavor, the decolonial task, which is to think in front of the others. My hypothesis for today is that the chapter of what is philosophy, the chapter Geophilosophy, has exactly the same task, to connect two main events, the transformation of the ecological situation, or what I would call the terrestrial situation, and a decolonial task. The term geophilosophy appeared mainly in What is Philosophy and in few pages, like if the task was still to be done, that like a program that we have still to continue or to reactualize. The source of the geophilosophy are twofold, as you know. First is Braudel and the school of the Annales. And what is very important with Braudel is that he invented the term geohistory to designate a specific place, the Mediterranean space, and to focus on the materiality and the territories of this specific space. And I think Braudel was very important in this for Deleuze and Guattari, because he is the first who localized in the materiality of the territory the emergence of philosophy and the emergence of different kind of form of experience and history. The second one is Nietzsche, and Deleuze and Guattari think mainly of the first text of Nietzsche, where Nietzsche talk about atmosphere, mood, what in German is designated by the Stimmung of some territories, etc. So it's a more immaterial sense. There is a very material sense in the inheritance of Braudel and a very immaterial sense in Nietzsche, which is a kind of mood of experience, styles of experience, styles of thought, atmosphere of thought. So, we have two gestures, and I call them gesture in What is Philosophy, particularly in the chapter Geophilosophy. I call them gesture to make obvious, make more apparent the operation that is at stake, the kind of gesture of thought. And there is two main gestures in the chapter of Geophilosophy. The first one is to become terrestrial. We have to become terrestrial. We have to become it because we were never terrestrial, or at least the modern were never terrestrial. They were all the time animated by out-of-ground categories, out-of-ground thought, out-of-ground philosophies. We have to become terrestrial. And it's a gesture. It's not just a general idea, a general theory. It's a way of problematizing our situation, problematizing the statue of our idea, the statue of our theories. This gesture is already well expressed in the first phrase of the chapter Geophilosophy, when Deleuze and Guattari write, "Subject and object give a poor approximation of thought. Thinking is neither a line down between subject and object, nor a revolving of one around the other. Rather, thinking takes place in the relationship of territory and the earth." I'm very interested in reading this phrase in a very pragmatic sense. You might know that William James, said that we can evaluate ideas, theory, concept, philosophy, mode of thought. We have a kind of method to evaluate them. It's to ask for each of them what difference it makes in the experience. If you see the difference that make a concept in an experience, you have the meaning of this concept. And the pragmatic attitude consists to take all the time the effect of a thought, an effect of a concept, an effect of an idea. I think we can inherit from this pragmatic tendency, this pragmatic claim to say that we have to evaluate, not in the difference of experience, but in the kind of producing of territories. What kind of territories produce what sort of concept? If you see the kind of territories that it produces, you have the meaning of this concept. And we can do it for every kind of philosophy, every kind of concept. And I think we need absolutely this evaluation today in the inheritance of the modern thought to evaluate once the complete set of concept of the moderns and to evaluate what kind of territory that they produce. And we will see that they produce out-of-ground territories. Like if to inhabit the earth, they have to invent a no-earth territory, something beyond the earth. And this ability was in the same time a very disastrous process because to inhabit the earth, they had to forbid all the others to inhabit the earth. So it was a kind of machine of war. So the question is, what kind of territory produces a thought? What kind of territory produces a concept? What kind of territory produces a theory? And we have a pragmatic tools which consist to focus on the territory. If you see the kind of territorial effect of a thought, you will understand what is this thought, instead of focusing on the representational dimension of an idea, a concept of a theory. It's why the chapter Geophilosophy you will find an obsession, a kind of repetitive obsession. And this obsession appears very clearly in the example where Deleuze and Guattari talked about the different kind of philosophy and the different kind of national philosophy, if we can say it, the German, the French, and the English. And they have a very sympathetic to the English one when they write, England, from this point of view, is Germany's obsession. For the English are precisely those nomads who treat the plane of immanence as a movable and moving ground, a field of radical experience, an archipelagian world where they are happy to pitch their tents from island to island and over the sea. The English nomadize over the whole Greek earth, broken up, fractalized, and extended to the entire universe, founding, building, inhabiting. The French build, and the German lays foundation, but the English inhabit. And when you talk about the English, his reference are, lucky for me, who is a specialist of him, Whitehead and William James, mainly, is the English-American philosopher that he focused on, because they are the one who ask as the main question in philosophy, how can we inhabit the earth? Is the obsessive question, how to inhabit the earth? What kind of tools, what kind of abstraction we need to inhabit the earth? So the first obsession, the first gesture of geophilosophy is a gesture of territorializing the thoughts, in affirming that the main question is how we inhabit the world. And we can generalize this question and ask, in their normative dimension, how the moderns inhabit the world, and how, during the modern time, there were plenty of alternative way to inhabit the world, the Spinozist one, the Leibnizian one, etc., as kind of alternative way to inhabit the world. So this question of inhabiting the earth, it is in the same time very internal of philosophy, because it asks for each concept inside the history of philosophy what kind of territory it produces, but also to other way to inhabit the world, which is the decolonial task of the geophilosophy. We have second gesture, and it's again a gesture, a way to problematize the situation, to problematize the situation in which we are engaged. The second gesture is to regionalize our mode of thought. And that's, again, a very obsessive dimension of geophilosophy. We have, this is even the sense, because when you read geophilosophy, you can ask yourself why they take so much into consideration the birth of philosophy, why it was so important for them to say that the birth of philosophy was in Greece, and nowhere else. That can appear very scandalous. Why in Greece? Why not in China? Why not in the Arabic world? Why in Greece? Why they insist to say that? And of course, a lot of decolonial thinkers today say that's the disaster of Deleuze and Guattari, because they are so ethnocentric that they put the birth of philosophy in ancient Greece. My hypothesis is exactly the other way around. They had to localize the specificity, the regionality of philosophy to let space to other way of thinking. The insistence, very strong, very radical, nevertheless, philosophy was something Greek, also brought by immigrants. I like the formula when they say the first philosopher were the Apollon colonized, les colonisés d'Apollon. It's a very beautiful formula. All the ancient Greek philosophers, in fact, are just Apollons colonized. And they came in Greece. The birth of philosophy requires an encounter between the Greek milieu and the plane of immanence of thought. So this encounter is a very contingent encounter, very contingent. It implies migrants from all around the Mediterranean Sea, from Syria, from Turkey, and the specific milieu of Greece. This is the beginning of a big event, but a singular event, and not a universal event, a regional event, and we, philosophers, are the inheritor of this regional event. Even if the Greek wanted to transform this regional event to a universal event. the Greek milieu and the plane of immanence of thought. One example of this meeting, this encountering between the Greek milieu and the planes of immanence of thought, is the example of Heraclitus. Heraclitus defined in ancient Greece society organized around the notion of agon, as Nietzsche shows agon, which is the rivalry. Agon is everywhere in the ancient Greece, in the institution, in the school, in the war training, but all the time close to some institution. In school, we can call retrospectively in kind of discipline, there is different kind of agon, but the agon structurate all the time the Greek society. But Heraclitus not just generalized the agon, he put the agon everywhere, inside the things, inside the earth, inside the physis, and the agon became the polemos, the organization of all the elements to attention. The Greek milieu met the plane of immanence of thought because the polemos became the immanent process inside the physis. So, I will not make this long quotation, I continue on that. This idea that we have to regionalize the invention of philosophy and to see the very contingent event that produce philosophy. This contingent event, which is the encounter of the migrant and the milieu, is very important for our actual situation, particularly because we can rethink the complete history of philosophy as a regional attempt to inhabit a very specific earth, the ancient physis. The expression of regional ontology is again one from Bruno Latour when he described the inquiry into the mode of existence. He said we have to think of the very specific regional ontology of the modern. We have to localize it strongly. It's the condition to be in relation and to begin to have a diplomatic organization of all the way to inhabit the earth, not just the regional ontology of the moderns, but all the other ontologies or collective or whatever the terms that you use to express the diversity of way of inhabiting the earth. And when I say that, I want to make a difference between what we call the earth, which would be the common ground of all the being, and the way of inhabiting, which make the variety of articulating the earth. We see that with this gesture, very specific, and the obsession of Deleuze and Guattari to come back to ancient Greece, they prefigure what you will find in Descola, in Viveros de Castro, or in Latour later, which is we need today to articulate different modes of worlding, different producing of worlds, and we are inheriting of one of them, and we cannot talk for the other, we cannot think for the other, we have to clarify this very strange history, and to fragilize by this way all the pretension for the universality of the terms. The only strong example that Deleuze and Guattari give is in a footnote, is François Julien. Maybe you are familiar with François Julien when he wrote, for example, The Wise Man Has No ID, a very provocative book where François Julien say, the Chinese wise man doesn't have an ID. Why? Because the notion of ID is a Greek one, is the eidos. And this eidos was invented by the Greek. But the Chinese didn't have the notion of eidos, but they didn't need it. They were able to do everything in another way without the eidos. They didn't need the nature, they didn't need the physis, they didn't need the nomos, they didn't need the logos. And we can see that this was all the time contingent, specific event. François Julien is an Hellenistic specialist, so he takes all the time terms from ancient Greece and check what would be the correspondence in other culture, other ontology, whatever you call it, and it shows that there is all the time a strong alterity, which is not an alterity of language. It's not that the word is missing. It's a complete organization of thought that is not there. It is not a lack of it. It's another power. It's another way to world the earth. So we have two gestures in geophilosophy. First gesture, we have to territorialize. Second gesture, we have to regionalize, localize, territorialize, and regionalize. Two gestures. How they make the connection between these two gestures. And I think it's this connection which is at stake today. We cannot think the ecological question without the decolonial question and the other way around. So how they do that? They do it through a principle which is not an explanation, but which is a kind of, I would not, the term is not the best, a kind of methodological or tools of problematization, and it's the principle of contingent reason. I'm surprised that this concept of contingent reason was not more developed. Of course, since empirism and subjectivity, Deleuze talked a lot about the question of the contingency. But the idea of a principle of contingent reason appear, if I'm not wrong. But of course, when we say that, there is all the time someone in the room who say, no, I have a letter, there is a footnote, and there is something where he say exactly the contrary of what you say. So I will try to be more careful and say, I have the impression, I have the slight impression that it appears for the first time in what is philosophy in the chapter on geophilosophy. This principle, we have to understand it as a connection between these two gestures, the gesture of territorializing and regionalizing. This principle is expressed in one phrase: the principle of reason, such as it appears in philosophy, is a principle of contingent reason, and is put like this: there is no good reason but contingent reason. There is no universal history except of contingency. It's a strong phrase, and I think today someone like David Graeber, in his History of Societies, is very close to that. And one inheritance of this principle is also Isabelle Stengers, who used it to make an history of science, and she wrote the history of science in applying the principle of contingent reason, saying that the history of science is an history of contingent reason. So what does it mean, this principle of contingent reason? I think it has three main dimensions, three main claims inside it. First, they say there is no universal history. They want to say, they put the principle of contingent reason, they give it a very unusual extension. What I mean by that is there is nothing that cannot be expressed, interpreted through the principle of contingent reason. It's not a principle for a domain of experience, for a domain of knowledge. It's not just in the question of the history. It's not a way to describe the long history of the philosophy or to describe the societies. No, it's there, yes, but it's not only there. It concerns the history, the complete history of societies. All the time, the contingent reason. All the time, there is a contingent reason. In all the events political event, there is all the time a contingent event, which means that you can refer to the event through the contingent reason. You can interpret it to the contingent reason. But it's not just history. It's also the mode of thought or categories. What is of use for us? Space, time, categorization, representation, all, as would say William James, were at the beginning very singular events. What seems for use so of use or evidence, things that we don't question anymore, all the table of our categories, all of mode of representation can be interpreted through the contingent reason. On everything, there is all the time a very singular event that repeats itself, that went through the history and through the use of it and became something natural for us. It's the mode of thought. It's also the philosophical systems. There is no system that is necessary by itself. It's at the beginning a contingent reason. It produces a new way of thinking, a new way of inhabiting, a new way of questioning. But it's also an ontological principle, which means that all the beings can be expressed to the contingent reason. The contingency is the general law of all the beings. It defines the complete relation of being and thinking and all the mode of existence of being and thinking, at least for the philosopher, which means for this specific regional history. Secondly, they say that it's a principle of reason. And of course, it's a direct link to Leibniz, and particularly to the chapter in the Fold concerning the principle of sufficient reason. And it's beautiful if you make the link with the Fold, as I will do now. It's beautiful to see what is at stake for them in the principle of reason. Everything has a reason. This vulgar formation already suffices to suggest the exclamatory character of the principle, the identity of the principle and of the cry of reason par excellence. Everything is everything that happens, no matter what happens. Everything that happens has a reason. If the principle appears to us as cries, it is because each one signals the presence of a class of beings that are themselves crying and draw attention to themselves by these cries. It's very beautiful because they say that Deleuze call it the cry of Leibniz. And the principle of contingent reason is the cry of Deleuze and Guattari. We need to put the contingency on everything. It's not a good way to describe the events. It's even better to describe the event through the notion of necessity, identity, to the mode of representation. It's more efficiency. No, it's a cry, it's a claim, it's a way to address to all the beings because the beings claim to be addressed in this way. And why is so important? Because through the principle of contingency, you are getting sensitive to the singularity, but also to the precarity, to the fragility of all events, to the fact that something was there is a contingent reason, means that it would have been possible for it to don't be there. And we have all the time to be sensitive to that, because it's the root of the value of everything, and particularly in the situation of the new climate regime, where everything is in danger all the time. To use the principle of contingent reason is to address to our situation in a very political, ontological, and as said this morning, Rosie Beredotti, an epistemological claim. So it's a cry, it's an imperative, a way to address to the question. Of course, the principle of sufficient reason of Leibniz is exactly the opposite of the principle of contingent reason, but they share the same idea, the cry, the claim that we need a way to address to the being because the being asks to be addressed in a very specific way. Third dimension, the most obvious, of course, is the question of the contingency. The question of the contingency has to be placed on all being, on all our mode of thought, on all our theory, on all our way of thinking. It's a way to address questions to things. It's a way to take into consideration the particularity of what we are facing. The notion of contingency has two roots, two meanings. Contingency, first, the first meaning comes from the Greek endekomenon, which means what can be or not be, what can exist or not exist. So the contingency is the sense of something that exists but might be not existing. It's the traces inside all the beings of the fact that they exist, but it was not necessary that they exist. My way to interpret it is through Whitehead. I will read it, a quotation from Process and Reality. I will not go further in Process and Reality. You might know that Borges, the South American writer, wrote one day in his note, to understand the contemporary world, we should understand Whitehead. Unfortunately, no one understands Whitehead. So I will just quote him without trying to do anything. A feeling, but for Whitehead, a feeling is a characteristic of a being. So it's a feeling is everywhere in things, not just in human experience. A feeling bears on itself the scars of its birds. It's beautiful, the scars of its birds. And when he say a feeling, he say everything that exists, every act, every being, every existence bring with him the scars of his birds. It recollects as a subjective emotion its struggle for existence. It retains the impress of what it might have been, but is not. It is for this reason that what an actual entity is the meaning of the existence, has avoided as a datum for feeling, may yet be an important part of its equipment. The actual cannot be reduced to mere matter of fact in divorce from the potential. What Whitehead wants to say is that the contingent dimension of all being is a sense of all the possibilities, of the halo of possibilities that each existence brings with it. And we have to tell the story of these possibilities. We have to be attached to all these possibilities because they show different kind, alternative way of beings. Second etymology of contingency, and I'm a little bit proud to have found it, even if I'm sure that it's completely common, but I had the impression when I read it and discovered it that it was a little bit singular, is that contingency comes also from the notion of contiguity. What is in contact, what touches something else is the same root. The contingency, the sense of what exists might be not exist, etc., is in the same time a sense of the contact, of what we call the contiguity. It's exactly the chapter of geophilosophy. Contiguity means the zone of contact between two realities. It's the zone of contact between the pre-Socratic philosopher and the ancient Greece. It's the zone of contact between an idea and the milieu in which it takes place. You can analyze as much as you want the definition of an idea, a definition of a theory. You can analyze a philosophical system as much as you want. You will never understand the specific event that it produces, and the specific event is in the contact zone between this thought and the milieu in which it takes place. And you change the milieu, and the same idea, and there is a kind of, to come back to Rosie Braidotti's talk this morning, and the question that was addressed, there is a kind of pharmacon there, because what was a poison can become something else, and what was a remedy, a treatment, can become a poison if the milieu change. We can see it already. I will make a kind of provocative, and I didn't prepare it, so please don't take it too seriously, but all the principle of the French Revolution became machine of disqualification today of the others. So what was for once a tool for emancipation became something that closed and disqualified and destroyed a lot of things. So, to conclude, I will express or summarize what I say and express it through three principles. I don't say that they are exclusive, but they are three principles, or we should say three tools to problematize some situation. Three tools that is expressed by the geophilosophy. The first one, I would call it the pragmatic claim, which consists to evaluate each thought, each idea, each concept by its effect. And whereas William James had the tendency to express it through a kind of psychological dimension, I think we should use it now to express territorial dimension. We can evaluate the moderns through the kind of territory that they produce and the kind of tools, abstract tool, mode of thought that produce these territories. Second tool, second principle, it consists to regionalize our mode of thought. To regionalize means all the time to find the geography of our mode of thought, and the metaphor of the geography is all the time there in the chapter of geophilosophy. We have to find the geography, the space, the regionality of all our concepts, of all our evidence, but also the specific history. I'm sure, and I can say it, I worked on it about the concept of nature, the modern concept of nature. We can find the beginning of a story. We can situate chronologically where it begins to have the kind of concept of nature that we have today. And third principle is the principle of radical contingency, which is a way to address, a way to refer to beings, to extract some dimension of this being, and to become sensitive to the precarity, as would say Anna Tsing, when she said that the precarity is the common ground of our contemporary experience, the kind of precarity, the kind of fragility of our mode of thought, but also mainly of our mode of experience and of the reality of the beings. So this, we can come back And I didn't want to put everything on the name of Bruno Latour, of course. It was just for me a starting point, but it's also a good way to come back to it. We can now say that we have to, if our situation today is to think in front of two events, the one of the decolonial dimension of the encounter with the other and the other way to inhabit the earth, and the intrusion of Gaia, we certainly need to rethink a geophilosophy, not as an exclusive way to address questions, but as a tool to problematize our contemporary situation. Thank you very much.
Would you mind taking a few questions? Of questions? Yes.
Thank you so much. Really just inspiring on so many levels. This is partly a comment, partly a question, because I see some really interesting ways to work with this framework in relationship to Black studies in particular, critical race theory in general, as a a part of the problem of the how to think the indigenous. So two things I was thinking of. One is that in relation to their admiration for the English and the archipelago, the inhabiting, they like this. They see something useful about this English kind of sort of nomadism. It's interesting to think about someone like Edouard Glissant and his notion of errance and errantry, right? As I think the problem with the English, of course, is they're trying to make home everywhere, right? Instead of learning how to be at home in their own body, right? Which is what's forced upon. That's forced upon the Afro-diasporic, right? Is that their territory is reduced to to flesh, as Hortense Spillers would say, right? But then Glissant says there's something extraordinary about this. There's a kind of counter-actualization that the Afro-diaspora does, which is through dance and through music and through expression and through poetry, they do this thing that in 1,000 Plateaus, make a home out of your song, make a home out of your own style, make a home out of your own gesture, right? So I think there's a kind of lacuna around the question of racialization and coloniality there. There's a bit of a shadow spot in there, or affirmation of the English, right? That's a comment. And then related to that is, I want to know if this is, if I'm understanding you right. It seems like the best approach to the issue of the other, of whether it's Gaia as the other or any other others, right, is to dispense with this kind of project of trying to understand. It's what you said about Julien. He's not looking for a correspondence between words. Like we don't need to try to understand, how the indigenous, think. We need to understand why we have thought the way that we have. And in my own encounters with indigenous elders or wisdom keepers, that's exactly what they say. You're white people, you want to, become shamans. The thing you need to think about is whiteness. Where does whiteness come from? What is that?
Yes.
So is that a fair application of what you're trying to say? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's a very very complicated question because it articulates all the position concerning the question of decolonization and the others and these kind of things. I will specify the question and I will come to who are the moderns. I'm glad because I say that I will not say the question, so I use you to say that, That's funny. You ask me who are the moderns. We call it rhetoric. When I worked a lot with the inquiry with Bruno Latour because he had a project there and he asked several people to work on the project. And as I worked on Whitehead say that in fact the modern invent themselves through what he called the bifurcation of nature. And the bifurcation of nature is in fact a contingent event that happened in laboratory in 17th century. It would have been possible to do it in another way, but it happens like this, in this milieu, with this kind. So I try to apply in the same time the contingent reason. And it's a way by which you divide the body in two regimes of qualities, superficial and primary quality. And from this gesture that were very local, very specific, it allows the scientific to calculate all the organization of the body because you withdraw all the noise that is the subjective. From this gesture, it was put everywhere, and that was the beginning of our demarcation, of our opposition between what is real, what is superficial, the fact and the value, the subjective and the natural, and this gesture was the invention of the modern nature. The moderns are the ones who have this inheritance. If, of course, you found moderns everywhere in the world, as soon as, for them, the question of the bifurcation of nature is at stake. And we need to interrogate this kind of story because it allows all the others to tell the story of their own way to address question. And so, for me, there is, of course, hybridation, because you mentioned that the English went, the importance of the work of David Graeber when he made the story of society is that he shows all the time that, for example, a lot of Enlightenment categories in modern times was, in fact, linked to a lot of negotiation in other places than in Europe, and was mainly import inside Europe. So the Enlightenment is everything but European. Yeah.
Last question to the first keynote.
Just an annotation. Thank you so much. Splendid paper. Wonderful. I have enormous problems with Latour, and it's very well known. I will stick to the basic. The dawn of modernity and the bifurcation nature-culture is absolutely postulated on colonialism, but not only. We have, at the same time, massively, the subjugation of the bodies of women, the reorganization of the entire order of reproduction and sexuality, as something that Latour is immensely insensitive to.
Yes.
And others are not, whether we do this with Beauvoir, whether we do it with Sylvia Wynter, whether we do it with Silvia Federici, whether we do it with whatever. It's absolutely essential not to leave that aspect out of the picture, because we are wiping out 30, 40 years of feminist scholarship. We get to the object ontologists that erect a monument to Father Latour that lobotomizes the whole situation to do with feminism, and we get to a masculinist reception of Deleuze that Deleuze actually does not deserve. So there is also all that other archipelago. Please, let's keep it in mind.
Yes, I agree. I put Latour because, and I use a lot of Latour because Latour is a good platform for polemics. And so I like the kind of debate that it produces. But of course, we never been Latourian, and we will never be. Sorry? Yes. And
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.